Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the Contemporary Artist Book Conference. I am admitting folks as they enter the waiting room. If you are an audience member, I ask that you keep yourself muted, please. Thank you so much. There will be time for questions at the end of the session. And you can feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that through the session. I'll let in late arrivals as they come, but let's begin. Welcome, everybody. A brief word about the Contemporary Artist Book Conference. Initiated in 2008 by a group of independent volunteers, the Contemporary Artist Book Conference presents in-depth talks, panels, and conversations to further the critical dialogue surrounding artist books. Now administered by Center for Book Arts, the CABC committee is made up of a group of independent historians, art librarians, artists, and professionals in the field. The 2024 CABC is supported by Center for Book Arts with additional support from Deirdre Lawrence and the Grolier Club. Heads up to all that this conversation is being recorded and it will be available on Center for Book Arts YouTube page after the conference concludes. This session is entitled Analog Manipulations, Illegibility and the Artist's Book with Raffaella della Olga and Charlotte Youkilis. Raffaella della Olga works primarily with typewriters modified through abrasion of the letters of the alphabet. The book is her space, but she considers herself a sculptor. Since 2016, she's created more than 50 typescripts, all unique. Her works are present in different public collections: the Met Museum, Thomas J. Watson Library, Getty Research Institute, CCS Bard, Mary Louise Hessel Collection of Contemporary Art, Haas Arts Library of Yale, and M+. Charlotte Youkilis is a curator, writer, and artist based in New York. She's a graduate student at the Center for Curatorial Studies, Bard College, where she researches image-text relationships. She currently works as head of research and external affairs at Spessa Women. Previously, she's held positions at the Clark Art Institute, Peggy Guggenheim Collection, and Bowdoin College Museum of Art. I'll now pass it off to Charlotte to get us started.
Thank you, Jillian, for the introduction. It's wonderful to be here today, and I'm so happy to be in dialogue with Raffaella della Olga, an artist whose work has been at the forefront of my research and whom I greatly admire, to discuss her practice as it relates to asemic writing and alternative forms of literacy. And thank you to Raffaella for joining us from Paris, where she's based. To begin, I'm going to present for a few minutes on some of the research I'm doing at the Center for Curatorial Studies, which I think will provide some helpful contextualization. And after that, we will dive into a conversation, and there should be some time at the end for audience questions. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. My research stems from the concept of asemic, meaning having no semantic content, which I see as a very particular and generative intersection between the written and the visual, as well as between the fields of literary and art historical studies. I propose that asemic might be best described as polysemantic, or having many meanings, as the ambiguity of asemic writing forces the viewer to generate or make meaning from what they're looking at. It functions as a provocation to thought, encouraging a form of thinking that doesn't rely on systems or conventional structures. So it's really something open-ended and based in a sense of wonder. In thinking about the sender-receiver model of communication, there are three stages: the sender, who encodes a message via a specific medium, whether that be speech, the written word, etc., and then the receiver, who interprets the message. I intend to look at how that model breaks down specifically around the context of asemic writing, where the viewer is encouraged or even conditioned to quote unquote read, even though the content appears illegible. What happens then on the receiving end? How might someone read and generate meaning when the content strays from all linguistic understanding? If illegibility makes something impossible to read or decipher, perhaps then unconventional forms of reading and meaning making might be activated. These concepts are not necessarily new. The roots of what we now think of as a sort of reduced or constrained language stem from ancient practices, as we heard very beautifully presented in the session before this. And they appear repeatedly across history, from post-classical revivals to Guillaume Apollinaire's calligrams at the start of the 20th century, and even the typographical experiments of futurism and Dadaism. But my focus begins around post-World War II avant-garde and conceptual movements like concrete poetry from the Brazilian Neugandris group, Mary Ellen Solt, who reformatted diagrammatic codes that were used by NASA to execute the moon landing, and Irma Blank, whose text-based abstractions explored the gaps or the lacunae in written expression. This work took shape primarily during the 60s, and that decade really became a critical period for this linguistic turn of conceptualism. In part, we see that with the works of the artists Mirtha Dermasace and Mira Schendel. Dermasace's work was more gesturally abstract, and her chosen medium was often various formats of communication: the postcard, the book, the letter. When Roland Barthes came across Dermasace's work in 1971, he wrote her a very affectionate letter where he states, "You have managed to produce a certain number of forms that are neither figurative nor abstract, forms that could be called illegible writing, which leads readers to formulate something that is neither a specific message nor a contingent form of expression, but rather the idea, the essence of writing." Her work became influential to Barthes' later 1973 essay, Variations in Writing, which questions the possibilities and limits between meaning and signifier altogether. The Swiss-Brazilian artist Mira Schendel's works were often manifestations of language, words, and gestures. Schendel had an extended dialogue in the 1960s with the theorist Willem Flusser, who argued that Schendel's work was an attempt to overcome the meaninglessness and transparency of the world, that it actually pointed towards the future. The symbols within her work suggested new meanings, allowing the mind to symbolize and propose new codes for understanding altogether. In looking at these figures and theorists, my aim is to better understand why artists and writers continue to practice forms or variations of asemic writing today, and how those motivations might differ from these earlier periods. Particularly, I'm thinking about artists working after the rise of the internet in the 1990s, which generated an entirely new landscape of technology, media, and communication. The decades since have also witnessed a decline of the print format, replaced instead by instantly accessible digital mediums. How might we then classify the impulse to write and the implications of these practices within the context of the digital age or the information age? And I think that might require looking more towards the future or the potential futures of language. So in 2011, Flusser argued that print-based thought was about to be overhauled by the revolution of digital information, signaling a sort of break altogether with print consciousness. The signs appearing on computer screens were no longer traces engraved in objects, as conventional writing might have been. In an article from 2014 on post-digital aesthetics, the theorist Florian Kramer describes a contemporary disenchantment with digital information systems and media gadgets, which coincides, I argue, in the context of the art world with engagements of analog media, the audio cassette, analog cameras, and more. And others yet have posited that we are heading towards something called a post-print or even a post-literate society, wherein the written word is no longer necessary or common. Consequently, artworks that engage with asemic writing today have different implications than the predecessors I mentioned. They may signal a post-digital return to the origins of how we build language, both materially and conceptually. And they force us to ask what literacy, or the ability to quote unquote read an artwork or read writing, means today. What happens when we willingly evade the conventional structures of literacy? And how can we envision alternative or even collective forms of meaning making? Which leads us at last to the work of Raffaella, who for more than a decade now has chosen to work with analog formats, nearly exclusively with the modified typewriter, in order to, as she states, write and draw her own path to abstraction. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I would love to show a really short clip of Raffaella working in her studio, sort of a studio visit, before we dive into the conversation. I think it's a helpful way of understanding her particular way of working. Jillian, if you're able to share that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to 3 Star Books for that beautiful studio visit short film. So Raffaella, maybe we can start at the origin, from your transition from sort of a legal background to becoming an artist. At what point did you begin making work, and when did you adopt the book format?
Yeah, for reason related to my family, I couldn't choose what to study, even though it was important for me to go to college. So studying law and becoming a lawyer was a kind of a forced experience, but at the same time, it allowed me to get away from reality to which I didn't want to belong. When I finished my study in law, and then I stayed 3 years in a law firm cabinet in Bergamo, I felt that I had to do something different in my life. So I started to think about study fine arts. And then the other step was to change my country. So I decided to go to live in Paris. I moved to Paris first in 2002 and then permanently in 2007. And was a real big change, kind of another life, a new beginning. And this new beginning was also linked with an idea to change my name. So my family name is Panzeri, but I decided to find another word and another space for me. So I became Raffaella della Olga. And I started to this new life in Paris, but I wasn't linked with other artists. I didn't know the art world itself. So it took a long time to find a way to be an artist, to allow myself also to be an artist, because I was already in 2007, I was already 40 years old, and I was a mature woman. But in 2015, I find my studio, my actual studio, what we saw also in the film, and it was an important moment for me, because the experience made before, I started to do kind of a visual poetry and sound poetry from 2010 and 2015. And then when I was in this studio, everything converged, and I made like a declaration. I want to do books, unique books, and I want to work with books like as a volume. So this is my experience from a background from Italy, where I was a lawyer. I also worked in a factory for a while, and changed my idea of also my language, because I started to talk in French, and explore my own path with new tools, and then we go.
I'm actually going to pull up the visuals again.
Yeah.
So that we can have that. Okay. I wonder if you can walk us through the development of your ongoing T series. You use slightly different materials for each book, but they're unified through the use of, the typewriter and also visual abstraction. So how did that series evolve and come to be?
Yeah. So the choice to use the letter T, in French is a tapestry. It was followed by the chronological number of the new book, is the idea to underline the origin of the acting of typing. So I wanted to highlight that the typing, in my case, is an original writing, is comparable with the manuscript, with the handwriting, because what I'm doing with the typewriter is with the different action that I made, is with my hands. It's comes from me like a kind of creation, and I'm not doing something to create or reproduce a text. So the idea is to first say is a tapestry in French, because I live in Paris, and I have my dialogue mostly here. And then I use also number, because I prefer numbers than words. I feel the numbers are more democratic, 6 for me, for everybody in the world. I feel that numbers are more abstract also. And numbers are more in relation with the space and the cosmos. And so I don't have titles for my work, only numbers. And so right now I made 51 tapestry.
Beautiful. And in terms of the method, you use carbon paper, which I think is really unique. How does the carbon paper function in the process?
Yeah, it's a carbon paper and ink ribbons, because there are the two kind of ink. But the obsolete of carbon paper is maybe more unusual. When I started to do works on typewriter, first I used blue, red carbon paper as a common carbon paper. But then I discovered that I can find a colored carbon paper. So I was very intrigued, because colors play an important role in my tapestry. And the carbon paper is also very versatile. You can use it many times. You can make copies. You can transfer also what I call a kind of phantom marks, because the carbon paper keep the memory about each writing. So there are like a stratification, and when I use the carbon paper, I can see on the paper, on the surface when I typed, the absence from another typing. And so it's a very special tool, and because actually my tools are very cheap, I don't spend a lot of money, but and I don't know, they are very useful for my work. So and also the fact that I can have many colors. I have orange, I have different kind of red, I have kind of green, two kind of green. So this is very important. And also I don't put in the basket carbon paper till the end. So when it's completely done, everything is done, okay, I can separate from it.
Right. And so some of the earlier works in the T series, this is T3, use more legible like letters and symbols from the alphabet. And as your practice developed over the last decade, you seem to have moved towards expressing something more and more abstract, a sort of writing that's transcending the semantic realm. And I think of, the lineage of concrete poets and conceptual artists, and also this work, Marcel Broter's Homage to Mallarmé. And so I'm curious about how these artists have influenced your work and also that desire to separate meaning from language.
Yeah. So the first typewritten work is not on the website, but it was related with the subprime vocabulary, because during the subprime crisis, so around 2011, because it arrives later in Europe, I was intrigued about the vocabulary of the notation agencies, so Standard & Poor's, Fitch, Moody's, because they use just 4 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, and the plus and minus, and 3 numbers. And to make a kind of note to the economic condition of the country. So it's very important to know that AAA, it's a healthy country, and a D is a default country, and it's just a kind of a language for few people. The professional know the meanings, but for us, the people, receiving this kind of notation, it seems to me a little bit strange, and crypt also. So what I started to do for T1, T2, and T3 then, because it's a transition, because at the same point I said, okay, to say AAA, BBC, CC1, or to say hyphen, / underscores, it's the same discourse, is hidden, it's crypted. So I started to do the notation, or the table of the notation, the agency rating notation, with a kind of design drawings. And then I started to do the books. And then I started to make also the transition from the vocabulary used by notation agency to the use of only signs. So the T3, we can see the letters and the numbers and the minus and plus disappear, and we have only eagle, underscore. So this is the first idea when I started to work with the typewriter, and the mostly are in black and white, because the colored carbon paper arrived later. Another encounter was it is very important for the books, is Marcel Broter's Homage to Mallarmé, Image. Through him, I discovered the poem, Un coup de dé jamais n'abolira le hasard, de Stéphane Mallarmé. And I have to say that I have to owe to Mallarmé many things about my work. I owe the idea of the book, because le livre, the idea of the space, the idea of the transparency, about the deepness of the paper, or the white paper, and also the simultaneity from text and images, because I consider Mallarmé the pioneer of visual poetry, and also about typography, how you use different kind of letters and characters. So in 2018, I made this work, Coup de Tram. Maybe then we can share with the audience the poem. I realized with a typewriter a new work on Coup de Dé, as many artists do this kind of homage to him. And I was really happy because at that moment I find in the internet a very strange specific typewriter, because it has a carriage a large 90 centimeters. So it's very special typewriter, and I could not find another one like this. And immediately I saw the possibility to create a new work and to be faithful to the size of the Gallimard edition of Coup de Dé. The Gallimard edition is 1913. And because I can put inside a large paper, so 50 centimeters. So I made two versions of the poem, one on white paper and the other one in tracing paper, because also to be close to Marcel Brothers. And what I did is to put between the tracing paper and the carbon paper a piece of woven fabric, because at that moment my typewriters had already changed the keyboard, so I can use this flat key, and with this flat key I can reproduce the support between the paper and the carbon paper. So in this case is a piece of fabric, and we can see in the poem a kind of a shadow where we feel something related to fabric. For this reason, I called this poem Coup de Dé frame, trame, pardon, from my English, from Italian language, because in Italian we say il filo del discorso, so the thread of the speech, where thread is linked with the idea of the speech, and also the wave.
Raffaella, you also have referenced artists using linear and grid systems, like Soluit. So do you ever think about the writing then as something more like permutational or even mathematical?
Mathematical, not at all, because I'm really, really not bad with mathematical, but I love numbers, as I said. But yeah, Soluit, when I started to work with the typewriter, because the line is my raw material, I finally started with the hyphen and dash, so it was mostly lines. When I saw about Soluit, I was particularly intrigued about what he made up with the Seth Siegelaub Xerox book. I was fascinated about the 24, the grid with the 24 permutation about the lines in the space and the colors, because there are also four colors. So permutation of 4 lines in the space in the 4 direction plus numbers means many lines and many possibilities to build a book. And so because the permutation, it's for example, for me, I can't permute a word, but I can permute a line. And so for this reason also, the abstraction, I feel better with abstraction, because I feel more free. It's a kind of experimental, is a kind of experimenting myself in a space, and I feel more in my space when I am with lines and signs. And so when I discover the reader from Xerox book, sorry, I started to be fascinated about Solowit, and in general, in any case, American minimal art is very important to me. And then because you start to look at the artist, I also discover Dan Fleming, and who is also very important in my work. I made, but maybe we talk.
I would love to talk about T32.
Yeah.
I'll put some of the moving images on if you want to describe that project as a sort of dialogue with Dan Flavin.
Yeah. So in the apartment where I live, I have a catalog from the retrospective of Fleming at the Dia Art. It's a catalog from Yale University Press 2004. And I was often in dialogue with only the catalog without thinking about to make something else. But one day it was like a very intuitive moment. I said, okay, I want to do a unique book, but I want to try to reproduce in a scale of the catalog some of the installation made from Dan Fleming. So what I made is to take one tracing paper, putting it on the book, make the lines of the installation with the Flavian installation, and then use it like a path and put in the typewriter, and then typed with the eagle signs and the flat key of the typewriter. And I used white carbon paper because it's done in a glossy black paper. And sometimes there are some typed installation fluorescent tube in graph paper. And the format of the book is A3. And sometimes the writing is so strong, and you can see on the back a kind of reliefs, and I increase the reliefs with the rubbing with the carbon paper rubbing, and to increase the fact that is also linked with a sculpture of light, but is a sculpture. We can maybe show some pages of the book.
I have
We
these
can-
ones up here.
Sorry?
I have these ones go. Is this slide working where you can see the different pages?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't have it. Do you have it?
It should be going on the screen now.
I didn't see. It's not there. I don't have the slides of the book.
Can others?
The T32 animation is working. Yes, we're seeing pages of T32.
Really? Me no. Okay, sorry.
It's going over there on that. But I'm gonna switch it. So I'm sorry that you can't see the slides, Raphael. And now I have T27 up now.
Okay.
And I want to transition a bit to talking about the book as a model or even like a physical structure. Especially thinking about, something like T27, or even more recently, you've experimented a little bit with the Leporello as book format. So I'm curious about how these more, alternative book formats like the Leporello or this listing paper, how those function for you.
Yeah. Because the tool itself, it's a typewriter. I knew since the beginning that I have a limited possibilities to work, because the tiness of the support has to go inside the carriage. So the challenge is also all the time with a new paper, for example, like the listing paper, or the new format like a Leporello, because it's my first Leporello. And for example, for the T47, the Leporello, I have like a kind of challenge, a deal. I want to put inside the typewriter a unique piece of paper. So because the Leporello is an alphabet, I have 26 letters to type, and it means 7 meters of paper. And I was able or not, I didn't know, since the end of the work, because the work could be, I don't know, you can scratch the paper, you can make a mistake when you type the letter. So there are sometimes experience with the typewriter where I'm not allowed to make mistakes. And it was the case of the Leporello. And I keep something from the Oulipo about this kind of obstacle or constraints. It's the better word. Because I feel that increase my possibilities inside the typewriter instead to create blockage. And the same things is for the T27. In this case, is a listing paper. I used at that moment because I made the T27 when I was during the COVID period. So I haven't with me my typewriter, so I buy another kind of typewriter, electric one, and I erase the two key, the dot, I think, and the underscore, because they are the only one when you can keep the finger on it and moving the carriage constantly without doing something like this. And I put inside the typewriter, in this case is 16 meters, 16 meters of a page, and trying to avoid to broken the, I don't know how you say the space, because the listing paper is to scratch. I'm not sure it's the right word. And when it happened that the paper broken, I decide to use the thread to sew the pages and to maintain the entire work. And is also typed back and front. And all the time is this kind of idea to try to push the boundaries away to increase the space, because it's a limited space. But what I can also do is I can work without problem in longer, and I can't in larger. But the Leporello T47 and T27 are the two example where I try to work on a long piece of paper. Sorry.
I love that you reference Oulipo. Can you speak a little bit more about, maybe explain what that is, and how it functions in your practice?
Yeah, I don't have a direct literary impact in my work, so I don't. Also because I don't write, I'm not making novels or kind of writing. But the Oulipo movement is very important because the project itself was really, really strong at the moment with Raymond Queneau and Italo Calvino that I love. And but I feel really very close with Georges Perec, because I was a fan of him. And from him, for example, I learned that a constraint is a new possibility for writing, is something also important for the reader, because the reader is invited to feel free inside the book and see the books like something open and rather than closed. So be in dialogue with this artist, creator, writer is very important, because you learn also how you can build something not academic. And because I'm not doing something academic, I'm more linked with Oulipo than other experimental writing.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious, I was thinking about this period of the 60s and Marshall McLuhan's book, The Gutenberg Galaxy, which was published in 1962, which sort of explores the cultural impacts of the invention of the printing press in the 15th century and movable type. And he suggests that the printed word essentially introduced an entirely new form of communication that emphasized this visual and linear thinking, and also set forth a culture dominated by text. So I'm really curious to explore more your relationship to the written word. And I'm curious about whether you consider these works and these books to be a form of communication. Are they meant to be, read by the viewer as the book format would imply, or are they something different altogether?
I don't have the feeling that I have a communication to give to my public or for the public in general, because I'm against a little bit the language. I am against the interpretation, and for this reason I step away from the words. As I said, I find a way to create something that allowed me to make only signs and build a kind of language, but completely linked to the view, not to the meaning or to explain, because I had this problem also when I was a lawyer. I don't want to make a kind of discourse and to say this or that. It's my I don't know why, but I study law, but because we live also with the contradiction, and contradiction are very, very important. So I don't think, to respond to your question, to be related with a kind of a work who can make a communication. What I just, because of the subject is I avoid also things like subjective. So what I like when the people open or are in front of the typescript, what I like is the fact that everybody can see what we want. Everybody can decide that it's a line coming from here on that, but I don't care. I just like the idea that they appreciate the fact that there are there is movement, there is something to discover and to be to see, but not to communicate.
Okay, right. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the choice of the typewriter. And maybe to start, what was your introduction to the typewriter as machinery? What were your first encounters with it?
Yeah. So when I was young and I lived in my little village, I spent a lot of time with my father. My father had a hardware store, and in the office there was a typewriter because we need to make the invoices for the customers. So this is what was the first time that I saw a typewriter. Then I studied accounting. So I used typewriter, and I also did stenography. But then I studied law, so I stepped away, and there were the 80s was the computer. I completely forget the typewriter. They disappear. And then because I was for a while intrigued with visual poetry, and it was a tool at the moment. Before the computer, the typewriter was in each apartment, in each how to write letters. And it was a tool for used by the artists in the 60s, 80s, 70s. And in 2010, I spent 2 months in New York just to stay to discover the city, and I decided to buy a typewriter. So I found on Craigslist, I think, yeah, an Olympia A4. And I made a series of typewritten postcards, and then I keep the typewriter with me in Paris. I worked a little bit on this tiny one, and then I started to buy only A3 format. And I also found this exceptional A0 typewriter. So at one moment also I stopped to do A4 tapestry typewritten books, and in 2018 I sorry, I made my first A3 is a T10. And since then, I work mostly on A3 or other format, but not A4.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking also a little bit about the history of the typewriter. And the first mass-produced typewriter was developed by the same company that used to create sewing machines. And Derrida also talks extensively about the relationship between writing and sewing. And I think like the hyphen, which you use a lot throughout your work, is similar in some ways to the stitch of sewing. And then there's also the etymological connection between, to text and, to weave or to sew. How do you consider those histories and that connection within your practice?
I see what you mean about the hyphen, because at the beginning it was also something talking to me about when you have a gene, you see immediately this kind of hyphen. But then I decide that my writing is not related with the idea of waving, because actually I can see something comparable, because the lines could be like the threads interacting and made in this kind of texture or piece of fabric. But at the same time, and in this way, I feel like a sculpture. I hit the paper. The paper is very thin. It's also very fragile, and the fact to hit and is not mechanical, is physical. Is me, my energy, and also accident, and also change the fact that I change the colors, because when I have a color carbon paper red, then I come back with a green, then I come back with a there is analogy, but at the same time I prefer to say that it's totally different, because I don't draw, I don't paint, I don't sew, I hit the paper. So, but there are points in common, because there are tiny relationship, but at the same time, I prefer to be most related with the writing.
You mentioned a little bit about sort of the different color and materials, and maybe I can skip forward a little bit to, yeah, I'd love to talk more about the materials that you're using. And you also mentioned that sometimes the material itself determines the content of the page, but your books are made from such a wide range of materials, glass paper, carbon paper. Here we have aluminum paper, and the impressions then create something similar to reliefs, and the books become very sculptural in that sense. but there's also this element of material literacy because the books are so heavily tactile. You really want to touch them when you see them. Maybe you can speak a little bit more to, yeah, how you choose the materials that you're working with.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the material that choose me. It depends. For example, I didn't know the crepe paper, and I was so fascinated last in November. I saw this crepe paper, and it was so beautiful, and it was like calling me, come. So I bought it, and I started to work on the crepe paper to make some works. But it's also, I don't know, I'm all the time looking around me because we are confronted with other artists, other aesthetical forms, and because it's important for me to make all the time a different kind of work. So I made repetition, but I don't want to make a repetition of a book. It's important to feel like a little bit wild, to accept that a rough paper, like a sandpaper, goes inside a typewriter because it destroyed a little bit the typewriter because it is rough. But it's also linked with the idea that the sandpaper is a useful paper for many works in the building, on wood. And I like the idea for it, but for example, to change the nature of the paper and give it a possibility to be beautiful because it's not. So this is for the sandpaper. The tracing paper is very important because I'm really attracted about the windows. Windows is very important for human beings. We see through the windows the world. We can have imagination through the windows. It's important. They are very important for the artists too. I was fascinated when I learned about Ellsworth Kelly. He started with the windows in Paris. So, and with the tracing paper, I can make layers and play with transparency. And T40 and T39, there are two books where I pay homage to the windows. And then gold leaf, and then copper leaves. It's all the time a kind of experiment. I'm never tired to try something different and to see what happened. And also, it doesn't matter if the typewriter is broken, I can buy another one. But it's a deal. It's also very exciting to see that it's possible because at the beginning you don't know. And then I also done some works with the leaves, vegetal leaves. So it's a kind of possibilities to create all the time different kind of books with the same tool.
Right.
You know.
All right. I want to make sure that we can open it up to audience questions, but I just want to ask one last question because you know, I love the use of photograms in your practice and, you know, incorporating light sensitive paper as well. You describe these experiments with photograms as texts of light or metaphors of light. So I'm just wondering if you can explain that process of creating photograms and yeah, where that developed from.
Yeah. I started to be artist with the camera. I started with a Nikon, and I made since 2002 till 2007 analog photography. I made a large format of the photography, the photo were in a large format, and they were taken only during the full moon. So I took my tripod and my camera, and then I made my photos with longer exposures. And then I decided in 2007 to stop to working with photography because I felt like limited. And something very important remain in my work. The idea of the light and the idea of the image, because as I'm said, I work mostly in image than in meaning. So I said, okay, I would like to work with the photo paper because it's sensible to the light. But I made some text before to start to make the book, and I tried to do first with the academical development of the photo, so with the 3 steps. But then I said, okay, I don't want to do something close to the photo. I'm not a photographer, so I want to do something different. And making tests, I saw that if I avoid the first step, so the developer, I can keep this kind of violet color, because the photogram is just fixed, and so I avoid the first step and just fixed and washed. And I started to put the paper on the light with a fragment of a piece of fabric, because I use fabric to type. And sometimes I went to the black camera and typed inside the black camera some writing, and then exposed the paper of the light, and then fixed. And it was so fascinating. So I made three books, unique books on photograms, and it was a very beautiful experience, because the paper sensible to the light is a paper like in movement, is a paper who record the time and the situation, because if it's a sunny day, it take very fast the light, so you have to be careful. And if you put a piece of fabric, a very tiny thread, it takes hours and hours. So the first I made, the T34, I wrote the time of the exposure on the back of the page. And the other one is another experiment. And the third one is made with the copper leaves on it.
So beautiful. Thank you, Raffaella. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And yeah, I'd love to open it up to the audience if anyone has questions.
Can I start by reading just a few questions that are in the chat?
Please. Yeah,
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, both of you. That was really great.
Thank you very much.
The first question in the chat is from Adeola Eze, who writes, oh, can you share a link to your works after your session? I put your website in the chat. Taken care of. Next question. Can I ask Raffaella? Okay, so Ann Butler asks about the sequencing of pages in your works. Raffaella, do you envision a sequence or flow from the initial conceptualization of each work? Or can you speak on the sequencing of pages in the books?
Because the work starts with a typing back and front, needs to have then another page. So the sequence is like something inside already the typing, because also the fact that I use the carbon paper allowed me to put 3 pages, for example, with 3 different kind of color carbon paper, and then I can have back 3 different kind of texture, also because the hit is stronger for the first page, and second less and less and less. So this kind of touching and also visual results made itself something that need to be explored in a page. So when I started to work, it was like a need to put together pages like a film sequences. I can't just work in one page. It doesn't make sense for me, because also I wanted to put a step away in relationship to the visual poetry. I know visual poetry, I love visual poetry, but I'm not a visual poet. I don't want to be a visual poet. I want to make books, and inside the books there are my idea of a combination of colors, because they are very, very important. And also this idea to have inside something linked to the silence, for example, because my books are silent. They don't speak. They just make it possible to go through a page and another, and then, as I said before, to be free to decide that is a windows or just a square, or I don't know. But it's this idea that it's important to me to feel free inside something that is also silent. And the sequence is related with the film, like the film of the camera. Because, for example, Charlotte talked about the sewing machine. And for me, it was a nice, at one moment, when I realized that the two ink ribbons turns, they start and they finish. It's like a camera, analog camera, a Bolex is the same. A film in a camera, when you take photos, is the same. But also when you put your thread in a sewing machine, it starts and it ends somewhere. So this is also something that very, very important for me, and is movement, and is the idea to be on and off. And a book, when it's closed, could be off, but then you open it and it start to give something back, but it's not words, just this.
Thank you. If anybody else has questions, you can drop them in the chat, or use reactions to raise your hand. I actually have a question. I was really struck in the video of you working in your studio of just how loud it is to be making to when you're working, and how a lot of the clips that were shown were very percussive and rhythmic. And does music and rhythm, like, how do you think about rhythm, or do you think about music at all when you're making your work?
Yeah, actually it's very noisy, and for this reason I have a cask, because it's I protect my ears. And the sound is very important. I'm working on sound, kind of idea of a score also, because I feel like a pianist or a drummer when you play drums. So there is this element of a sound, but I don't listen when I work, because it's impossible, of course, because of the noise. And I made four typewritten books with the idea of sound and the idea of score. We talked also with Charlotte about maybe an idea of a code. But again, it's abstract. I don't have yet tried to play it. Sometimes I record, and I try to put 5 different record of typing all together. But of course, it's cacophonic, but it's ongoing. I mean, I also have this idea to make something related to the sound. but it's not yet clear. For the instance, because I'm very intrigued since I discover contemporary concrete music, how now most of the musicians don't play the academic chord, for example, on a violin, but the boxes or I don't know, up and down, everything. So goes outside the rules. It's a kind of rules for me. And with the typewriter, for this reason, you see that I put sometimes the key through the paper and move the carriage. And this is a kind another possibilities, another space, another way to play, because there is something ludic in my way to work with the typewriter, because instead you can work with it. So I'm not alienated, I'm not frustrated. I like it to make my work, but because it's also something coming back, you try, and there is a kind of discovery, and I like it. So the sound is important. And I made one the T42 is a kind of homage to Conlon Nancaro. He made only partition for piano mechanical. And there are these kind of lines or codage. We talked with, as I said, with Charlotte, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody in the audience? Last call for questions. Joe, are you raising your hand?
I am raising my hand. I was kind of up and down, but
Yeah.
wonderful presentation, and your work is really exciting. It was interesting when you were talking about sound, because at the moment I'm working with a composer and I'm using found piano rolls, and some of the way that the typewriter kind of aligns. I was just thinking of visual compositions. Wonderful out of print book called 21 Compositions, which talks a lot about that kind of playing to images. But I also noticed the sound as well, which I thought was terrific. So good luck with moving into that. I think it'll be really exciting to do that.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay, great. Charlotte, are there any concluding questions that you have had in the
No,
past 5 or 10 minutes?
I could obviously ask a million more questions,
Yeah.
but I guess just thinking about some of what I spoke about at the beginning in terms of the world that we're living in now, and the digital age and the information age, what comes next for you? Will you continue working with the book format? Will you stray from it?
Yeah, I understand the question, because we are living in a very, very faster digital way, but I don't feel comfortable also with the computers. As I said, musicians are like an example for me. When you play a piano for 8 hours all the days, then you have a concert. I feel like the piano is like a piece of your body, because you can't live without. So I don't feel that I can stop to work with the typewriter. And also I'm here and now. So here and now, yes, typewriting. I started to do, just to step away a little bit from for the books. I started to make typed paintings. So this is new, and I want to explore more this new idea of writing on surface with a volume, but not in a book. And then I don't know, but I don't think I will be able to find the same richness that I found in a typewriter in a computer, because I'm like a 20th century person, and it's too fast, and how I built my own idea of aesthetical form, and that are related really with the time, because I don't know, I can make 5, 6 books per year, not more than this. And I need time, I need also to explore the world around me about the art, and my response is analog. Analog.
Thank you so much, Raffaella.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Gillian, and the Center for Book Arts for this opportunity for me and Charlotte, and go ahead with the other, and I hope it will be better.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Raffaella. That was really wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I am about to put in the chat the invitation to the final session of the conference for today. There are 3 more tomorrow, but the next one is at 3. So if you're available at 3, you know, have a little snack and then come join us for material literacy at 3 p.m. And thank you all so very much again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you again, Charlotte and Raffaella. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.